There's three ways of changing data in Dia. One, you can edit it via the user interface, which is slow but easy. Two, we can use the API if we've got programming skills. And three, the method that I'll be talking about now is using CSV text files, comma separated value text files. This is the recommended solution. You do need to have some decent spreadsheet skills. Because we're using a spreadsheet, we've got options. Most people think immediately of using Excel. That's actually my least preferred choice. The two tools that I use, and I do this a lot, are Google Sheets and LibreOffice. Now, Google Sheets is quite a powerful spreadsheet tool, and because the data is in the cloud, it's very easy to share with other people if you need it to be checked. If you're more comfortable with the traditional desktop approach, I recommend LibreOffice instead of Excel, not just because it's free and not just because it runs everywhere, but it actually has some significant technical advantages over Excel when it comes to working with CSVs, and you're less likely to make big mistakes when you use LibreOffice. So some more details about why I think LibreOffice is better. The first reason is that when you open a CSV, you always go through the import wizard, which Excel bypasses now, and the import wizard means you get to review every column and say this column contains a date, this column looks like it might contain a number, but actually I want you to treat it as text. Excel skips that screen and it makes assumptions about the data, and it gets those assumptions wrong. It always gets barcodes wrong. It thinks that barcodes are large numbers, and it rewrites them into scientific notation. If your skews look numeric, and if they have leading zeros, or if some of them are numeric, Excel will convert the ones that look like numbers into numbers, which means it throws away leading zeros. You can avoid those steps easily. By default, standard default import of text of CSV into LibreOffice does not make either of those mistakes, so that's quite a big time saver. LibreOffice is available at the link there. It comes with a couple of versions. There's a very conservative version and there's a more up-to-date version, which is called the Fresh version. I recommend that. When you go to download it, they encourage you to make a donation, but you can skip past that and download it for free. It's open source. Of course, if you do find it useful, you might consider donating to the project later. So even though we're talking about importing data and changing data, the best workflow is to start by exporting what you have now from Dia into a CSV, modifying the data that you want to modify, deleting the rows that you didn't change so that we don't re-import them. This is just a safe tip to avoid trying to change data that you don't really want to change, and then when you're happy, you re-import it. So this is a screen from Dia. I've gone to inventory and I'm viewing all products. I'm going to be making some modifications to this. As I said in the workflow, the first step is to export the data and then we import it. You do a lot of product import and export from the product screen. And if you look at the export menu, we can see that there's quite a few different file formats for exporting the data depending on what it is we're changing. One that we're going to use a lot is to export the inventory list, which is all the key master data information about the products. You can see there's two variations, one with and one without descriptions. Descriptions is the HTML description of the product, which is used for synchronizing to e-commerce sites. The HTML description can be quite big, so that's why there's an option to export the file without the HTML description, and that's actually the one that I choose most often. So we choose to export it, and it saves a file to the computer, naming it with today's date. And that's been saved in my computer. For this exercise, I'm going to be using Google Sheets. There'll be a supplementary video as we go through and repeat this process with LibreOffice. So here I'm logged into Google Drive. I'm in the temp folder. I'm going to do a file upload and upload the file I just downloaded, and it's beginning the process of importing it. into Google Drive. It's a CSV file. So when I double click to open it, Google Drive goes into preview mode, which is not what I want. I actually want to open it as a sheet. And now we've converted it to a Google spreadsheet. And we have one row for the header data and then all the data of the products. I'm going to freeze the top row. And here we have lots and lots of rich data. So I'm going to be changing products in a certain category. I'm going to be changing products which are in category mobile phone. I'm going to get rid of the underscore there. So, and products which are not in that category, I'm not going to touch. So this is a good chance to use a filter. In Google Sheets, if we want to filter one particular value, we should first clear everything and then find the value that we want to change. Okay. So if we do that, I can now go and change the category to mobile phone without the underscore. But if you remember the workflow I discussed, I said first we should reduce the risk of making a mistake by eliminating all the rows that we know we're not going to change. So let's go back to our filter and let's reverse the filter by selecting everything except the category we're going to change. Start in the first row, and I use Shift Control down arrow as a shortcut to select all the rows. You can do that with the mouse as well, but one way or another, after we've applied the filter, we select all the rows which are there in the system, delete them, and now we go back just to reassure ourselves that the only rows left are the rows we want to change. Now all we have to do is make the change to the column we want to change. I'm going to copy. I'll do it with the mouse so you can see what I'm doing, and paste. Notice that I don't touch any other column. Deer is quite literal about importing. If I delete one of those columns or put a blank value in it, then that's what we imported to Deer. I'll wipe out the value. Let's put some dummy barcodes in as well. I've got a sequence, so I can now drag it down, generate unique numbers. Okay, I'm happy with that change. All I've done is change the category. Now I need to, since I'm using Google Sheets, I need to download it as a text file again. It's given it a new name. It's still not a very helpful name. So I'm going to give a more descriptive name to help me keep track of it. And that's now saved back on my hard drive. Let's flip back to Deer. This time I use the import. I'm importing the same type of file that I exported, inventory list. Okay, so that was an example of when everything works lovely, no errors. Let's go and check the product just to see that we're happy with it. I have category in the list view, so I should be able to search for it. I'm going to search for mobile, and you can see these products have changed to the mobile phone category. And I can't show barcode here, so let's go and look at one. There's my barcode. Good, so that was success. That's how you do an import export. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is not related directly to the import, but it's a little bit of data cleanup we should do. I renamed one product category, mobile underscore phone, and replaced it with mobile space phone. Now when I create a new category via the import process, Dia will simply create the new category, but it's not smart enough to know that there are no phones left anymore in the old category, so the old category is going to stay in the system. If we want to clean up the old category, we go to settings and reference books, choose product categories. We'll see a list of all the categories. This is the one we don't have anymore, the mobile phone underscore. I'm going to delete it. It's not directly part of the import process, but it's a nice step to clean up the data, just to make sure that people aren't going to be confused when they create a new product and they see two categories which look like the same thing. We want them to use the new category. So now I'm going to show what happens if we import the file into Excel and how we use LibreOffice to do the same thing as Google Sheets. So here's a product file I downloaded. I'm using Linux here, so to open it into Excel I need to take a slight diversion since I don't use Excel very often. And we can see what it's done to the barcodes. One example of what Excel does to data. It thinks it's dealing with a large integer, so it converts it to scientific notation, which is actually very annoying, and it's difficult to stop that behavior. You have to go through several steps to import the file and get the wizard so that you can choose what the column data is. Very annoying. I can't be bothered. So this time I'm going to open it in LibreOffice. Calc is what LibreOffice calls its spreadsheet program. This is the traditional wizard that you might remember from the old days when Excel used to do this. So this lets you review a column and give it a specific type of data. Okay, actually not going to do anything. I'm just going to click OK, and it opened another window. So let me just rearrange my windows so that you can see that. Right, it's imported into LibreOffice. It's very similar to using Excel. So I can freeze the first row like I did in Google. And I can go through the same steps of filtering on the category, deleting the products I don't want to delete, making my changes, and then making sure that I save it as a CSV, which it will do anyway by default. I opened it as a CSV, so normally it will just save it as a CSV without me having to specify that, but if you do need to specify it, that's what you do. I'll click save, and I won't overwrite the file, but that's what we would do if we were using LibreOffice. It's very similar to using Excel, and so most people can quickly find their way around using LibreOffice if they're familiar with using Excel. So the input I did before worked fine, no problems, but sometimes you will get errors. So I'll show you what happens when you get an error in a data import process. I'm going to continue with the product import process. So I'm going to introduce a couple of deliberate errors. First, I'm going to put a blank value in a field which is compulsory. And I'm going to duplicate this SKU. Download the file. Since I've gone back to working in Google Sheets, I'll call it the errors file. Okay, dear, I'm in my list of all products. Let's go to import and inventory list. Click on this box, drop files here. Okay, so 3 lines with errors. Clicking on this red X button tells me what the error is for that particular line. It says the costing method is not one of those values, and there it is, it's blank. The second line, row 5, product code must be unique, and I get the same message there. So you can either go back and fix the data file and repeat this process, or you can upload the lines which are good. You can separately download the lines which are bad, and you get a CSV only with the invalid lines. And then when you're happy with the correction, you re-upload it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to use undo to restore the file to how it was with no errors. Download it. I'll use the same file name even though there are no longer errors in the file. Back to Dia, click, find it again, and import was successful.